This is the Atari Days podcast.
I actually only spent about 18 months writing those 3 games, and I probably would have done them in, much sooner time, but I was 23 and lazy.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Russ Wetmore started at Adventure International, where he worked with Scott Adams on Savage Island Part 2. He then went on to program Preppie, Preppie 2, and Sea Dragon, all 3 games which were published by Adventure International, and Homepak business software, which was published by Batteries Included. This interview took place on September 24th, 2015, and then a little bit more on January 4th, 2016. After the main interview took place, Russ sent me the source code for Preppie, Preppie 2, and Sea Dragon, plus a demonstration disc of an unfinished Atari game called Lulu. I successfully archived all of those discs and have posted them to archive.org. Check the show notes at ataripodcast.com for links to the disc images, plus a link to a YouTube video of the Lulu game.
I was working in music publishing. I was working for Columbia Pictures Publications, and my father bought a Radio Shack computer, and I liked it so much I saved up money, bought my first computer, and started writing software for it. And one thing led to another, and I got involved with a fellow by the name of Phil Oliver. And Phil and I started a company called the Corn Soft Group, and we published games and utilities for the TRS-80. And we were at a show in Boston, and a guy named Scott Adams walked by my booth, and we talked for a bit. And after a little while, we went to dinner, and we got to talking, and he said he liked my personality and offered me a job. So I thought I was getting a job as a programmer. Come to find out that Scott thought that I would make a great artist liaison, because I would know how to talk to, at the time they published third-party software, so he thought I would be good at talking to potential authors. And they got this new computer. It was called an Atari, and they only had one, and Scott was operating a retail store at the time. And I would go in there to play with it, and I started programming in BASIC. And after a little while, I convinced Scott that, maybe I could help out by, writing something. So Scott gave me a TRS-80 game that they had. That wasn't really a game. It was a kind of a football stats tracking program, and asked me to convert it to the Atari. And so every day I would go to his retail store, because the only one they had was there, and I programmed for it, and just came to really, like the Atari, like just how it worked and everything. I finally went to Scott, and, I said, I could write an arcade game for this computer. And, he had no reason to believe that I could, but he funded me an Atari computer and gave me time to work on the program, and that's how Preppie was born.
So, was the football stats program, was that something you were doing in BASIC or machine language?
Yes, it was written in BASIC.
Okay. So how did you just teach yourself machine language out of books, or to do prepping, or what?
I don't remember exactly the process. I didn't really consider that assembly language was all that much different from BASIC. I was naive enough to think that at the time. And, not, being naive about it, I just didn't think that it wasn't something that I could do. So I dove in, and originally I used the Atari assembler cart, and found that it didn't do everything that I wanted to do. And I ended up springing for a copy of Atari's macro assembler. And the cool thing about that was that I had done some assembly language coding for the Z80, for the TRS-80, and I found I had a hard time converting my line of thought to the 6502 and the way that its registers and pure page memory was set up. So I figured out that with the Atari macro assembler, I could actually write macros that looked like Z80 instructions, and that persisted for the rest of the software that I wrote for the machine. I basically programmed in a kind of a pseudo Z80/6502 assembler style, and that's how that worked.
Oh, nice. So, Preppie, how can you? I think you've told the story before, but not to me. So, tell me the story about how the idea for Preppie came around.
I used to spend an inordinate amount of time at the arcades, and this new arcade game, Frogger, had just come out, and it was pretty cool, and I used to spend a lot of time playing it. And so I thought, well, with the Atari, hardware architecture, especially the graphics architecture, that it would be real easy to do a Frogger-like game. And by manipulating the horizontal sync signals, I could actually create more than the handful of colors that you could get with it. But I didn't want to do Frogger as it was, so I started playing around with it and changing it a little bit here and there. And my wife at the time, Diana, actually suggested that the Preppie book, the handbook, it just was a big deal at the time. So she was the one that suggested that I should write a game about Preppies. And Mark Murley, who was a very talented writer who worked for Scott, came up with this backstory, and everything just kind of fell into place. So I finished the game, and it took me a long time, at least in those days. What I thought was a long time, it was something like 8 weeks to do from start to finish. That's not knowing anything about assembly language.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But for me, it just seemed to take forever. And Scott saw it and loved it, and we were off to the races.
Nice. So, your background in music composition totally shines through in that game. How important was it to you that the music be awesome? Because the music is awesome.
Well, since I went to school to study music composition, and I worked for the publishing company for a long time, doing mostly educational music arranging, so concert band, marching band, that kind of thing. I had seen a couple of articles where people had written basic synthesizers, and they could only do 2 voices, I think. And I thought, well, I could do 4-part harmony. It would be really cool, but no, I can't do that because I have to reserve one of the channels for sounds. So 3-part harmony was the way to go, and I arranged all the music and kind of created my own language for entering the music into the source code, and it just kind of went from there.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Did you run into any? You or Scott run into any legal issues for making a game that was pretty similar to Frogger?
Yeah. Let's see. At the time, it was a fairly common practice to take existing arcade games and modify them a little. I think the issue was that Preppie was such a big seller, and Online Systems had purchased the licensing rights to Frogger. And at the time, they were, I don't know, they seemed to be very protective of their licensing. So I wasn't the only one. There were several developers who were threatened with action by Online. And to the point where at one of the trade shows, somebody was distributing T-shirts that said, "You weren't anybody until you were sued by Online Systems," or something to that effect. Nothing ever came of it. I think by then the game was dying down, and Frogger was doing quite well and ended up surpassing Preppie in sales. So,
did you actually do what you were hired to do of artist liaison when you were there, trying to get new programmers into Scott's company?
Absolutely. I developed a rapport with quite a few of the developers, and a couple of them became good friends. I did that for about a year and a half before I started writing games on my own. I helped Scott with one of his text adventures, and I think that was the thing that finally, that and we would spend any hours in the office that we weren't working playing Wizardry, which was a big game at the time. So yeah, I did that pretty faithfully for the first year and a half or so.
Good. So I think the adventure game you worked on with Scott was called Savage Island Part 2.
That's right.
Any stories about that? Anything the world needs to know about creation of Savage Island Part 2?
No, Scott was, I hate to keep saying this, but Scott was such an instrumental person in, getting me into this business and my being successful. He, I just mentioned to him one day while we were playing Wizardry that I might like to help him with the next one, and he agreed. Truth be told, Scott did all of the coding. I basically helped with the story, and one of the things that Scott wanted to do was to make the most difficult game he had done up until that point, to the point where he had written the first game that would give two different clues at the end of the game, which you needed a clue in order to start the second game. And no one knew, and I don't ever remember seeing it in print, but no one knew that there were these two codes. So people would finish the game, they would get a code, but they had forgotten to do something in the game. When they tried game 2, it would tell them that they hadn't actually solved game 1 yet, and they had to go back and play the first one again. So a lot of the ideas in the game Scott's idea was the extinction of the dinosaurs, and we knew it was going to take place on a satellite orbiting the Earth, and we knew that it was going to have these incredibly difficult puzzles. I helped out with I think my biggest suggestion was the piece of weird string that you tied together. It became like a portal loop, like in the game Portal, where you could go from one part of the maze to another without having to hit every room in between. And that kind of freed up the capability of being able to, place things in certain places where you knew that they would be able to get back to them later on.
Preppie did well, and it won all sorts of awards and things. And was Preppie 2 a foregone conclusion?
It was, but we had a TRS-80 game called Sea Dragon that somebody, one of Scott's developers, a guy named John Anderson, was porting to the Apple II.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it, and I said, this would be a piece of cake to do on the Atari. And Scott said, well, go do it then. We need it done. It took me a total of about 4 weeks to do Sea Dragon. And most of that time was spent designing the game layout, the puzzles and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 4 weeks to create. It took about 6 to 8 weeks before it hit the market. And before it even hit the market, there were pirated copies of Sea Dragon floating around. Even to the point where I went to Scott's store one day, and there was a kid who had a whole box full of floppies, and he was proudly showing off all of these games that he'd gotten his hands on, and one of them was mine. So was Sea Dragon. So it wasn't even released yet. That was the really irritating thing about it. So he went on. He had attracted a crowd by that point. And he was showing off the game. And when he was done, I just walked up and put, I don't remember what it was, $2 or $3 dollar bills on the table. And he said, "Oh no," I says, "This is free. I'll just make you a copy of it." And he said, "No, you have to understand that when you steal this, you're taking this much money out of my pocket. So I just wanted to save you the trouble and give it directly to you." And he turned, white as a sheet, and I never saw the kid again. But I think I'd made my mark. After Sea Dragon, I was kind of disheartened by the whole piracy thing, and decided that Preppie 2 would probably be a safe bet because Preppie had been so successful. So I worked with the artist that provided most of the artwork for Adventure International at the time, a guy named Preppie.
Mm-hmm.
Don't remember his last name. And he came up with the graphics, and Mark Marley again came up with a really good backstory for it. And that one took me about 6 to 8 weeks to write.
Wow. Yeah, all of your games have a very unique look, and just out of the font and I don't know, something about the way they look makes them stand out. So kudos to your artists and to you to do that.
Yeah, the fonts were my idea. I just couldn't stand anything that looked like the stock Atari, blue background, kind of, dot matrix characters, and anything I could do to get away from that, I did. So, my games are awfully colorful. They're, the lettering I kind of kept the same through all 3 games that I wrote because, I thought that would be. I thought that would be a trademark of the games, and I was also kind of silly enough to get Adventure International's artist Preppie to put my name on the Preppie cover, and a lot of people came up to me after that and told me that they thought that I must be somebody because my name was on the front of the package. So, lucky accidents, I guess I'd have to say.
Nice. After that, you stopped creating games, as far as I know.
It kind of, it's kind of a long story. I had actually gone to New York to do an interview with Arnie Katz and Russ Kunkel, not Russ Kunkel, Bill Kunkel.
Electronic Games Magazine.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I did the interview with them, and then later that evening, I went to this award ceremony, and I was up on stage with David Crane and a few other people, and the video game awards were brand new that year, and Sid Caesar was the host of ceremonies there, and I just remember getting this real surreal feeling, and I think I even said in my acceptance speech that I didn't quite know how to assign value to someone legendary like Sid Caesar handing, a relative kid an award for, a game that took just a little time to write. It's not like I worked on a movie that took, 5 years of production and millions of dollars to produce. This was, done in a corner of my bedroom with a, $1,000 computer system. And I started writing articles for High Res and for, I think I wrote a couple for Antic and I wrote for Analog. And decided, I think that I wanted to do something bigger. And I had started to get to know the Trammels, and I knew Tim Oren, who worked at Digital Research, and he was working on GEM for the Atari ST. And Leonard Tramiel and I went back and forth a couple of times, and we decided that I was, that they would loan me an ST system, and I would do some software development for them. And for a variety of reasons, it just didn't work out. I didn't feel like I had the tools that I needed on the ST. GEM was a joke. It was, difficult to code for. It was buggy as hell. And I just kind of lost heart after that. And that's around the time that I met a fellow who's a friend of mine, well, Dan, actually. A friend of Dan's and mine named John Mitchell. And he worked for Apple. And we got to talking, and John was impressed and invited me to come out to Cupertino to interview, and I got the job at Apple. And from there, it was, bye-bye video games.
Yeah. And you were working on the operating system on the Mac, is that right?
Yes, I actually started off in QA, and I had written a couple of control panels, one of them called Color, which was fairly well received. And I met a fellow from Apple System Software Group, and told him that I would really like to work on new operating system stuff. And to my surprise, he walked away, and then later on I found out I was moving to another cube, and I was suddenly in the System Software Group. So that was, like I said, it's kind of lucky coincidences and lucky occurrences.
Yeah. So where does Homepak fall into this timeline?
Homepak was just before I went to Apple. Homepak, I had written Home Term quite a while before, and I had written the original version in BASIC, and Action had just kind of appeared, and I started playing with it, and figured out that I could make code that was much smaller and much faster than I could with BASIC. So it was nice to work in a high-level language again after working in an assembly language for so long. And so, one thing led to another. Some folks I'd met at one of the trade shows, the batteries included, and I showed off Home Term, and they said that would be great, but couldn't I maybe come up with a couple of other programs to go along with it? And so I wrote Home Term and Home Text. When it came time to actually sell it, I was pretty adamant about not having any copy protection on the disc. I had come up with a fairly inventive copy protection scheme for my first 3 games, something I had learned back from my TRS-80 days, where the boot track of the disc was simultaneously in single and double density. And if you tried to use a disk copying scheme or program, it just would not pick up. It would not be able to track the disk. But that took so much time, and with Sea Dragon especially, like I said, it was only out a couple of, I finished the program, and a couple of weeks later, even with the copy protection, somebody had broken it. So I was kind of perturbed that I couldn't make copies of my own software, and I felt that was important. And it was a hard fight, but I convinced the folks at Batteries Included to not only sell the game without copy, or sell the Homepak without copy protection, but to also keep the price relatively low. That was another hard fight because they felt, being a business software package, quote unquote, it deserved to get a higher price. But I kind of felt that people who had been following me on the Atari and in my games would be more inclined to, pay game-like prices for software as opposed to, hundreds of dollars for a business package.
Mm-hmm.
So Homepak did really well, but Batteries Included, and I didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that relationship came to an end. And my company, along with it, because they were basically my only publishers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I met up with John and decided to move to Apple.
So yeah, I saw a quote from you, I think from InfoWorld magazine, that basically said that Homepak was your shot across the bow to end piracy because it was only $50 and anyone could afford that more or less, and it was just an interesting quote from you, basically saying like, just buy my friggin' program instead of pirating it. So
yeah,
do you think did that work? Do you think that worked?
I got a lot of good press for it. Whether or not it contributed to the piracy of the program, I don't know. I do know that when it, trying to remember the name of the company in the UK, I think US Gold, I think is the name of it. I don't remember.
Sounds right.
But when they sold it copy protected, and I just by that point I had left the market, and I just people who are going to steal software are going to steal it, whether there's a price for the software or not. So I just had to kind of swallow hard and assume that anyone that was using it wouldn't have paid for it if that was the only way they could get their hands on it. So
right. Can you be a little more detailed about what you didn't see eye to eye with Batteries Included about?
No, not really. Atari was not Batteries Included's main market. Their main markets were the PC and Commodore 64. We were late delivering some software. I had about 5 folks working for me in Star System software.
Mm-hmm.
And we were late delivering a package. I had hired a couple of guys to do the Apple II version, and they not only never completed it, but they kept the hardware that I had loaned them. Things just kind of, didn't work out very well. And, they were upset with me, and I wasn't terribly happy with the situation there. So
yeah. So tell me, what haven't I asked you that I should have about the Atari Days? Tell me a story.
I actually only spent about 18 months writing those 3 games, and I probably would have done them in much sooner time, but I was 23 and lazy.
I wrote a game in 6 weeks. I was so lazy. Okay, right.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I would work around the clock. That's where I found out that my circadian rhythm, my body clock was actually more like 28 hours, because I would just work until I dropped and sleep, 6-8 hours and wake up again and just do it all over again. And I would turn over days, about, once a week. But it was interesting that year, they had, the NFL football strike, mm-hmm. and they didn't play that year. And so the networks were scrambling for something to show on Sundays. And I got this phone call from some producer out in Hollywood, and they were talking about doing a game show where developers would play against each other on each other's games. So, and the whole thing was emceed by a very cute actress. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Mary Elizabeth something or other. And they flew us all out to Las Vegas, and we did the show in the old Sands Casino. And while I was there, oh God, this was so long ago. I can't remember the fellow's name. The guy who wrote Hackers.
The book?
Yes.
Oh, Stephen
Levy. Steve Levy.
Okay, yeah.
Yep. He was interviewing all of the developers who were there, and he said, "Well, I'm writing this book. It could be a really cool thing. Tell me some stories about your experience in running software." And I spent probably a good hour or two with him, telling my story. And when the book came out, I wasn't in it, and come to find out that I guess my story wasn't interesting enough, or it wasn't laced with enough intrigue and bad things happening to warrant being in the book. So I had told everybody that I knew that was going to be in the book, and when it went on sale, I went and bought copies the first day, and of course disappointed to find out it wasn't in it. But at the end of that, the game show, I don't think it ever aired. I think I don't recall anyone ever telling me that they saw it. We taped it, and it was supposed to be shown right away, but I think the network got cold feet and decided not to air it. So
it's too bad. I never heard of that, but that would have been interesting for a minute.
Well, yeah, no, it was definitely interesting. Meeting all of these other guys that I knew from reputation from their games.
Yeah.
That was fun. That was interesting. And,
do you remember what games you played and who you met?
I remember a couple of them. Clowns and Balloons, is that the name of it?
I think so.
That was one of the games, and Frogger was definitely one of the games. And let's see, what else was there? That's all I can remember off the top of my head. There were some Synapse games there, at least one of the, maybe Archon. Was it Archon?
Sure.
At least one of the Electronic Arts games was there. Yeah.
Nice. Well, that was good. Tell me another story. Let's just iterate on this.
Let's see. I did get a phone call from a fan of Preppie. It was a 10-year-old kid out on the West Coast who apparently didn't realize that there was a 3-hour time difference between him and Florida, where I was living at the time.
So he called you super late?
Yes. And of course he was really animated and wanted to know what special hooks I built into the game. Were there any special cheat codes? And I just remember thinking that I needed to screen my phone calls after that point.
Did you get other fan mail or anything?
I didn't get a lot. I got some. Most of the mail went to Adventure International, and I would only occasionally see, some of the better ones that they came across. Adventure International was going through their own series of troubles at the time, financial troubles. So, like I said, it was such a short time, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And things kind of disappeared pretty quickly.
Yeah. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would thank them profusely for, at least the ones who bought my games as opposed to playing them otherwise obtained. I probably wouldn't have ever done it in the beginning if it wasn't for the fact that I was, it was a way for me to be artistic. I started off in music composition when I was when I was in high school. I had these dreams of becoming a great film scorer like John Williams. John Williams was my hero. Mm-hmm. And it just, I wasn't a millionaire by the time I was, 25, and I thought that was, the end of the world. I got into computer programming in a large sense because it was a way for me to be creative and see the results of my creativity right away. If I scored a piece for band or orchestra or whatever, it could be months or even years after I wrote it before I'd actually even get to hear it.
Yeah.
Pre-synthesizers. And, computer programming was a way for me to just, experience it right away. And the Atari was, kind of the culmination of that, being able to mix music and graphics and gameplay and I didn't spend an awful lot of time working on game levels. They just kind of naturally fell out. And looking back on it, I try to remember what I was thinking at the time. And lucky coincidences, that's pretty much describes my most of my programming career.
Yeah. Well, you may not have become John Williams, but you wrote the stuff you put together for Preppie 2 has been stuck in my head for 30 years. So.
Yeah, a number of people have told me that. I've ruined them for some music because they hear, they hear even a note of that song and they can't think of anything but Preppie or.
It's absolutely
Preppie 2,
true.
So, yeah.
And I interviewed someone, I can't think of who right now, but he said they worked in a computer store, and it's just like, it's all, we just hear it all day, every day, and it's just like, I hate that song, I hate that game, I hate it.
Right. Torture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a number of people tell me that. It probably would have been better if I hadn't had the same three songs cycling over and over and over again while you're playing the game. But
did you put together did you choose the songs, and how'd you choose those three songs, and did you license them, and why those three?
No, the three songs were public domain, so there was no licensing to worry about. I wanted some songs that sounded like, fraternity drinking songs or fraternity songs, and something that a preppy fraternity would sing, and that's kind of where I got I think I came up with two of the songs myself, and Diana came up with the third one. Preppie 2 was pretty much the same way. I picked songs that were in the public domain that I could get sheet music for, and then arrange them for the range of the synthesizers in the Atari.
Nice. Do you still have an Atari machine?
I did until about a year ago. I had fully intended on sharing the source code to Preppie 2 and Sea Dragon. I have kind of promised that stuff to the Video Game Museum, and somewhere around here I have the box. As a matter of fact, while I'm talking to you, I'm looking at probably about 10 boxes of 5-inch floppies.
Wow.
And I just don't have anything that I can read them with at the present time.
I do. If you loan me that stuff, let's save that source code and anything else you want saved, and I will return it to you, and you want to give it to the museum or whatever, that's great. But let's get that stuff off those discs before they rot away.
Okay. If they haven't already.
They probably haven't.
Sure.
Yeah, but I've rescued. I've probably put 500 Atari discs in my floppy drive in the last year, and uploaded, everything that I had permission for to archive.org, and a lot of them are readable.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting fact. A guy contacted me about a year ago and wanted to know if I would give him permission to rewrite one of my games in a browser in JavaScript. And I kind of jokingly said, yeah, no problem, because I figured, what could he possibly do that would work? And 10 days later, he sent me a link to a website where he had done it, and it's remarkably faithful to the game. To the point where it looks like a screenshot when it's actually a actual running piece of JavaScript code. It's amazing. So, I think back to at the time I was pushing the Atari to its limits, trying to get it to do what I wanted it to do, and nowadays you can just call up a browser in a couple of days. Do it. Took me weeks to do.
I've played the online version. That version, it's great.
Incredibly interesting. Yeah.
They have you can emulate an Atari 800 in JavaScript now. The whole machine
in JavaScript.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I've played my games on a Mac using a simulator. And of course, they depend on a whole bunch of hardware things. So I played one game and it just refused to run because everything was happening so fast. Because I didn't put any limiters in it, because at the time the guitar was barely fast enough to keep up with it. But it's interesting.
Cool. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have?
No, I think you've been pretty thorough. It's interesting that stuff all happened, back in the 80s. I've gone on to a couple of different careers since then. So it's been, it's amusing to me to talk to people who can remember that far back, and they still think of Preppie like, I don't know, like something wondrous. And when you look at the hardware that I actually had to work with at the time, it was actually pretty crude. The Preppie figure itself, for example, there was no good way to show the top of the head of a Preppie running, because it's a top-down view. And so I've got the logs in the streamer in perspective, but the canoes you can only see the tops of. The frog was actually suggested by Preppie, the artist, and he showed me the graphics that would make that work, and we thought it was kind of cool to tie, because kind of a backwards Frogger reference.
Yeah.
But I'm just constantly amazed by people who remember that. It's over 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Sure. No problem. I'll send you a link to that JavaScript game, and we'll connect up, and I'll try to get these discs to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
So Dan Horn, when I talked to him, told me to ask you about the unfinished game that had to do with an elephant called Lulu. Can you tell me the story?
Sure. I had just finished Preppie 2, and I had been up to New York for the award ceremonies for video gaming, or not video gaming. What was the name of that? I don't remember the name of the magazine, but it was a fairly big one at the time, and they were handing out awards, and I received one alongside David Cartwright and another person who I've forgotten. And while I was there, I went to interview with Electronic Games, and they had asked me what was my next project, and I just kind of, facetiously said, Preppie's in space, because, I needed a sequel, and that was just off the top of my head. And the funny thing was they kind of believed me, and they kept pushing me for questions about what it would be like, and so I just started making things up on the fly. But what I had in the back of my mind, a lot of the correspondence I'd gotten regarding my games were that they were very colorful, that they were very, that they, I guess Sea Dragon was a fairly typical shoot 'em up game, but, I tried to put some things in it to differentiate it, to set it apart. One of the things I noticed when I go back and I look at games of the age, a lot of them featured, brightly colored little sprites on black backgrounds. And I was thinking about the color background, and I was thinking, maybe I could do a piece like featuring, a jungle life, jungle animals. And my wife, Diana, and I had been, just throwing some ideas back and forth. And at the same time, I was working on a new version of my music synthesizer. And that synthesizer, it had kind of a novel way of taking two of the audio channels and combining them into one with a much wider range, so I could get really deep bass notes. Unfortunately, that combined two of them. That means I only had 3 voices total, and everything I'd done up until that point had been 4-part harmony. So I played around with a few things, and disco was hot at the time, and one thing led to another, and I came up with a kind of a funky riff that I thought was pretty interesting. And one thing led to another, and it finally came down to we needed a dancing, kind of a dancing animal, and what should that animal be? Well, elephant seems to make a lot of sense. And
it does? Okay.
I just, when you think about jungle animals, I don't know about, plus it was that really deep bass sound, that kind of, it was going to be a big animal. So I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. So all the help that I'd gotten in the past had been with an artist that Adventure International worked very closely with. And things at Adventure International were they were unraveling a bit. There were some financial issues, and it didn't look like they were going to be able to publish my game. So all of these things kind of came together. I found a guy that was kind of fresh out of college, and he was just playing around with video graphics for the first time. And I asked him to, I had very strict limitations on the size of the graphic and how many frames that I had to animate it in. And he did a great job with these graphics, and using only 4 colors, managed to make this elephant seem to come alive. So it was kind of this confluence of things all happening together and kind of merging together at the same time. Lulu, in earnest, I spent probably 3 to 4 weeks on, and most of that time was, as I said, playing around with graphics and new sounds and things, trying to get the game to gel together. And at that point, we were coming up on CES, and I needed to show the game around, and so I, under the advice of my agent at the time, I developed a demo disc. The basis of which is the video that's posted on YouTube. Mm-hmm. I've heard some people say that the game doesn't seem very interesting, and it isn't in its present state. I probably would have spent another month working on it. There would have, the the idea of the monkeys at the sides of the screen where they were going to be throwing coconuts at you, and the gameplay was going to involve you, being very strategic in the water that you would carry to fill the ponds. That water would also be used to defend yourself against the other animals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the gameplay was going to lie, and I never got that far. So, I would have done like I did with Preppie. I would have, tuned it over time and play tested it and see what made the most sense.
Sure.
And also the graphics are quite crude. The only graphic that I really had help on was the elephant. Everything else I kind of did myself, or took something else, modified it to make it work. So I would have spent a lot more time on the graphic design. But anyway, that's what the game represents. It was an attempt to to sell the game to a publisher, and that never came to fruition. And around that time, Atari was lobbying very heavily for me to do some Atari ST development, and so I eventually said, it's the wave of the future, so I should probably get on board. And I dropped the Atari 800 altogether.
You sent me the disc for Lulu, and I converted it to an ATR file, and I made a YouTube video of it. So what did you think the first time you saw it in 25, 30 years?
It was exciting. I actually kind of remembered most of it. I certainly remembered the music. I thought I had done more, finished more of the game, but in that respect, I wish I'd gotten a little further. But it was really exciting to see that some things you can remember from 30 years ago. they just seem to be crystal clear, and other things happened yesterday that I can't remember for my life.
Well, I'm so glad that you saved it and that it still worked, because it's always exciting to see a little piece of lost history, or a game that could have been or partially finished or whatever. So It's pretty awesome.
Glad you liked it. One of the I actually have very few of the Atari discs that I used to have. I used to have a shelf full of boxes full of floppies. Over the years, I've kind of been letting them go. Things I didn't think I would need anymore. But one disc I've kept all these years that I fully intend to use one day. And that's a game that, turning the tables on Dan Horn, a game that Dan Horn was working on at Adventure. Scott Adams, took a chance and gave him the opportunity to work on a game. And I think Dan would agree with me that it's probably not his best work.
What is it?
I'm kind of holding it as blackmail for the future.
Nice.
I may need it one day.
Well, all right. If you need that one converted, I'm happy to do that, or any other discs you have.
Okay. Just an interesting aside. After I spoke with you, I started thinking about what I could spend my spare time on, and I just on a lark on I went on eBay one day and I found some Atari equipment, and so I've been slowly purchasing little bits here and there.
Excellent.
I've got a Commodore 1702 monitor sitting in my living room. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet. I don't think I have a flat surface big enough to hold it, but the hope is I'll be able to pull some of these discs out, maybe find some gems that I can share.
Oh, that'd be awesome. So have you gotten what Atari hardware have you gotten so far?
I've gotten an 800. I've gotten a 1050 with a disc doubler mod, the Commodore monitor, which I still to this day think was the best monitor you could ever use on an Atari home computer, and a very assortment of joysticks and paddles and whatnot. I don't remember exactly, but I had a number of cheats in my games that used paddles.
Really?
Yeah, if you plug them into like ports 3 and 4, and I don't remember what the order was, but there was, you had to turn, I think, the paddle all the way one direction and press the button and hold it down for a certain bit of time. Anyway, that allowed you to like add lives and skip levels and things like that.
Well, now that we've got the source code, that'd be pretty easy to find out what those details are.
Probably, yeah. So who knows? I don't have a lot of free time these days, but let me just spend some time. Let me make some time to try to get back into it.
Nice. That would
be
awesome.
Fun. You just reminded me of all the fun that there used to be.
We're still having fun with Ataris, so I think that's what I need. Thank you so much.
All right. So thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Mm-hmm.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.